What is going on, everybody? Thank you guys so much for joining me and welcome back to the channel. And as I now wrap up this little mini series of which teams I feel has the most pressure to win the Stanley Cup this season, we're wrapping things up with the Central Division. Now, this division is a complete whirlwind where I feel like the vast majority of these teams have legitimate Stanley Cup hopes entering this season. So it was very difficult to rank these teams, probably the most difficult division to rank, honestly. Like always, feel free to leave comments, and what you believe I should have ranked these teams, but hear me out with what I have to say. And without further ado, let's get right into the list here. Like I mentioned earlier, the vast majority of the teams in the Central Division have massive aspirations to at least make the playoffs, and a lot of them are trying to win a Stanley Cup, but there is one team in particular that is not even at the same level, so very obviously they will be ranked 8th. So yes, this was a complete no-brainer for me. The team that I feel has the least pressure to win a Stanley Cup in that Central Division for this season, it's the Arizona Coyotes. Coyotes had a complete overhaul in the offseason, shedding off a ton of key pieces like Oliver Ekman-Larsson and Connor Garland, just to name a couple. And they are realizing that they really just need to pull apart everything and start a rebuild. Under the core they had, it was just not working out. They were a fringe playoff team over these last 3-4 years. And honestly, I applaud them. That's a very courageous thing to do. But now I feel like they're moving in an actual direction here. They're going to be tanking for some high draft picks. I mean, these first 2 rounds in the upcoming draft, they have 8 draft picks. So they're definitely stockpiling, building for the future. At the moment, they're just kind of icing a team for the sake of icing the team. I mean, the majority of their players are pretty much well-established players in the league, veteran players, I guess I would say. There's some few young guys that they are trying to build around a little bit, like Clayton Keller, who's 23 years old. You got Lawson Krause, 24, Christian Fischer, also 24, and of course on that blue line, Jacob Chikrin, 23 years old. But apart from that, it really seems like they're a team that's tanking. They're not expected to even compete for a playoff spot in that Central Division. They're going to try to win, a lottery here, draft a guy like Shane Wright, maybe Connor Bedard. I wish that organization nothing but the best, but as of right now, this is not a very good hockey team. To think that I thought the Buffalo Sabres were the worst team in the NHL, boy was I wrong. I think it's definitely the Coyotes right now. I mean, no disrespect to Columbus, but the fact that this Coyotes team gave up 8 goals to a Blue Jackets team that in all likelihood is going to finish bottom 10 in offense, if not bottom 5, that is not a very good look. So obviously they're in tank mode and they have no pressure whatsoever to win a Stanley Cup this season or to even make the playoffs, probably for the next 5 years at the very least, I think. And of course, from here on out, the list gets very tough and controversial and where my rankings are. But at number 7, I have the Nashville Predators here. I think their pressure is pretty low just because the division they have right in front of them, that Central Division, I just think it's going to be a bloodbath. And to me, I look at that Predators team on paper and I just do not see them better than any of those 6 teams I have ahead of them. Now, obviously, this is not a standings ranking, but at the same time, expectation does play a factor in how much pressure a team has. And for Nashville, I don't feel like there's a ton of pressure because I don't see them making the playoffs with the teams they have in front of them. I mean, I like some of the pieces they have. They have a decent core. UC Saros, 26 years old, going to be a very, very good goaltender. He was amazing last season, so he's going to be a key piece to that franchise for the next decade. Obviously, they have their core defense in Roman Josi and Matthias Ekholm, who they just re-signed. Pretty good contract, by the way. Both 31 years of age, and they got some younger guys who they acquired, like Philip Myers, 24 years old, Dante Fabro, 23. In terms of the forward group for this Preds team, there is a couple of young guys like Eli Tolvanen and Cody Glass, who are both 22 years old. Apart from that, they do have some older guys on the team. Matt Duchene, who's 30, Ryan Johansson, who's 29, Philip Forsberg, pending UFA, who may be traded during the deadline if the Predators do not do well. He's 27. To me, this is just not the team it once was. It's not that Stanley Cup contender that it was in 2017, 2018, 2019 even. Now, I still feel internally that they feel that they can be a very solid team, make the playoffs. But to me, this looks like a team that's in a retool right now. I just do not see them being all that competitive in that tough Central Division. And I definitely don't think they're good enough to make the playoffs. And I'm not the only person who thinks this. I think the consensus is that most people have the Nashville Predators finishing 7th in this division anyway. So that combined with the lackluster offense they have and just a little bit of a weaker blue line as well, there's not as much pressure on this Predators team compared to other teams in that Central Division. It's coming in at number 6 here. I actually have the Minnesota Wild. Even though the Wild last season established themselves as maybe on the verge of being a contending team, I still feel like the core they have in place is relatively young. Although I do see the pressure for them to especially make the playoffs, maybe even get out of the first round. But in terms of winning a cup compared to those other teams, I don't think they're quite on that same level. Like I said, because of the young pieces they have a much wider Stanley Cup window. So for me, the pressure, to win a Stanley Cup, I think they're going to have a ton of opportunity to do that down the line. Let me just go over some of the young guys they have here. Of course, their star player, Kirill Kaprizov, 24 years of age. Joel Eriksson Ek, who's also 24 years of age. He's a Selke candidate. He's a very good defensive center. Look out for him this season. Kevin Fiala, just 25 years old. I really like Fiala a lot, so he's going to be a really good player for this team for years to come. Jordan Greenway had a pretty solid year last season, 24 years old. Can he improve? Maybe. You got players on the blue line like Jonas Brodin, who's 28, Matt Dumba, 27. Still pretty solid defensemen in the prime of their careers. Even though Cam Talbot's 34, their goalie of the future, Kaapo Kähkönen, only 25 years old, and he's going to be in between the pipes for that Wild team, I believe, moving forward here. I didn't even mention some of the younger guys they have coming in, like Matthew Boldy, who's only 20 years old, and of course Marco Rossi as well, who's going to make an immediate impact on this Wild roster come next season probably, because I believe he is starting in the AHL. So yes, I really like this Wild team already, and I think they're only going to get better, but it is a very young core, so I don't really see the pressure, or I don't view this Wild team as having significant pressure to win a Stanley Cup this season. But definitely, continuing to establish themselves, get better, take the next step, make the playoffs, and win a playoff series or two. Maybe they can go on a bit of a run. I think maybe getting to the second round would be considered pretty successful, just because the bright future that they have on their roster, they're going to be a pretty good team for years to come, I believe. Coming in at number 5 here, I got the Dallas Stars. There always seems to be that one team in each division that has a pretty even combination in terms of veterans as well as young and up-and-coming players on the roster. And in the Central Division, it's definitely the Dallas Stars. And yes, they do have some of the core guys that are pretty old. I mean, Tyler Seguin, only 29 years old in the prime of his career, but Jamie Benn, 32, not the player he was in years past. You got Joe Pavelski, who's already 37 years old. Alexander Radulov, who's 35. Those core guys, the time might be running out for them. However, you look at some other players on this list, like Denis Gurianov and Rope Hintz, both just 24 years old. Yoel Kiviranta, 25. Jason Robertson, only 22. Then on the blue line, Miro Heiskanen, who's a very, very good defenseman and only 22 years old. Even though they have their goaltender of the future who is starting in the AHL because of their overhaul in goalies with Anton Udobin and Braden Holtby starting the season. Jake Andre, I believe, is only 22, 23 years old. And I thought he was pretty solid last season. So, there's a lot of time for this Stars team, especially with that young core that they have establishing. And although I did mention the vets, maybe their windows to winning a Stanley Cup and competing at a high level might be closing. It just seems like the Stars might be opening another window in the process, just with the very solid, already amazing young core that they have. So I feel like they're going to be a very, very good team, a huge threat to win a Stanley Cup in the years to come, not just these next 2-3 years. They'll be in it for the next 10 plus, I think. And just because they have those young guys, that's why there's not a significant amount of pressure, but there is a little bit given the core veteran pieces they have. But compared to the other 4 teams I had ahead of them, I just think the Stars have more time to get the job done and win a Stanley Cup here. Coming in at number 4, maybe this is a little bit of a surprise for you guys, but I have them ranked quite high, and I'll give you my reasons here. At number 4, I got the Chicago Blackhawks. Wasn't it just a season ago that the Blackhawks came out and announced to all their fans that they were going to be rebuilding? Yeah, that doesn't look like it's going to be the case anymore, given what they did this offseason. You add Seth Jones to improve that blue line, and you give him a huge contract extension. You add Marc-Andre Fleury, who just won the Vezina Trophy and looking to, still prove to everyone that he can play at an elite level. Still got guys like Patrick Kane, Jonathan Toews, both in their early 30s, but still competing at a high level in the prime of their careers. And a young up-and-coming Alex DeBrincat, who is just a sniper, going to be a top 5 goal scorer in this league for the next decade, I believe. And even though the majority of this team is actually relatively young, like Dominic Kubalik, who's 26, Dylan Strome, still only 24 years old. Of course, Kevin Lankinen, who had a pretty solid year last season, 26 years old. Probably going to be the netminder of the future once Fleury retires, I guess. And still some relatively younger defensemen like Ian Mitchell. I think he's going to be a pretty solid defenseman, 22 years old as well. Given all those young pieces I just mentioned, it would make sense as to why the Hawks organization would come out in a rebuild, especially in that tough Central Division. But now you add guys like Marc-Andre Fleury and Seth Jones. There is more pressure now than ever. I think this team not only is expected to make the playoffs, but maybe go on one last Stanley Cup run before they really have to tear it down with Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews on the waning stretches of their primes. And although I think it's very respectable what they did, because they want to honor Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews before they no longer play at this elite level for them to compete for at least 1 or 2 more Stanley Cup championships, I don't necessarily agree with the moves they made, because I just don't see the roster as all that improved. I'm not sure if they even make the playoffs in this division, because they still have a ton of young pieces, a lot of unproven guys. I just don't know if it's going to work out. I'm of the believer that they probably should have just stayed the course and continued to move on with the rebuild and try to move on from guys like that. But obviously, they're trying to compete. I mean, we'll see what happens. But as of right now, I'm not a huge fan of that. But regardless of what I think, the moves that they made tells me that there is a legitimate chance that they're trying to actually compete for one more Stanley Cup. And that's why I feel like there's a lot of pressure, because the time is running out for Marc-Andre Fleury. He's 36, 37 years old. And, Jonathan Toews, 33, Patrick Kane, 32. These guys want to win now. And obviously, maybe they believe they can still do it in Chicago. I just feel like there's a lot riding on this team, especially entering this season. Marc-Andre Fleury, he may even decide to retire. I mean, he kind of fluttered that idea out maybe at the end of the season. Say the Blackhawks don't make the playoffs, or he's not nearly at the same level he was as the previous year. He could just hang it up. So this is a very, very key season for the Chicago Blackhawks. And if they don't do anything, they're going to be going back in that rebuild. But right now, I believe that this season there is quite some pressure for this team to actually do something. Coming in at the number 3 spot here, I got the St. Louis Blues. Now, for the most part, this Blues roster is pretty much a veteran team. And had it not been for that 2019 Cup, I think I would have had them a little bit higher on this list, but considering they have won a Stanley Cup at least in recent years, they only rank at number 3, but there is still significant pressure for this team to compete for a Stanley Cup this season. Ryan O'Reilly, 30 years old. Vladimir Tarasenko, 29. You got Braden Shen, who's 30. Brendan Saad, who they just signed, 28 years old. David Perron, 33. The time is now for this Blues team to try to compete for another Stanley Cup. Even when you look at the back end, it's not all that young either. I mean, you got Justin Falk, who's 29. You got Torrey Krug, 30. Colton Parayko, 28. Robert Bertuzzo, 32. There's a lot of, veteran players on that Blues roster. And even Jordan Binnington, who is the starting goaltender. I think he's going to be the starter for the years to come. Maybe he needs to be more consistent, but he's 28 years old now. So he's basically in the prime of his career, and we'll see how he plays. Although they do have the odd younger player here and there, like Robert Thomas and Jake Neighbors and Jordan Kyrou, this is still a veteran roster, and this is the time for the Blues to compete for another Stanley Cup, because especially in this very tough Central Division, the Blues' expectations are kind of all over the place. Considering last season it was very disappointing. Do they fall flat once again? Who knows? But, they have the roster to be a pretty decent team. I think they could at least make the playoffs, but definitely there is some pressure for this team to go on a deep playoff run at the very least, if not try to win at least one more Stanley Cup. And also the prospect pool in St. Louis is not considered significantly deep as well. So if these guys cannot get it done, who do you have coming in really? At least I'm not aware that there's any real elite talent coming, but I mean, they do have some younger pieces. But anyway, like I said, this is an older team, and they got to do something before, those guys exit the prime of their careers and no longer play at the level that they play at now. Coming in at number 2, I got the Winnipeg Jets. Although the Jets overall are a little bit of a younger team, I feel like the pressure is more on them than it is on St. Louis. Number 1, because the Jets have yet to win a Stanley Cup under that core. The Blues have. And number 2, I just feel like the expectations this season are much higher on Winnipeg than they are on St. Louis. Like for St. Louis, it's really a flip-flop. Some people think they make the playoffs. Some people even don't. But I feel like the majority of people believe the Winnipeg Jets are going to make the playoffs. And people like myself, I feel like they have the roster now to actually compete for a Stanley Cup and maybe go on a deep playoff run. Kyle Connor, 24 years old. Mark Scheifele, 28 years old. Nikolai Ehlers, 25. Pierre-Luc Dubois, 23. They got a solid, relatively young forward group there, and also some veteran guys like Blake Wheeler, who is 35, but still I feel like is a very good player and will be for the next year or two, I think. Connor Hellebuyck, a top 3 goaltender in the NHL, in the prime of his career at 28 years old. And of course, that improved defense. You got Josh Morrissey, 26 years old, Neil Pionk, who's 26. Then you add guys like Nate Schmidt and Brendan Dillon, both 30. I just think given what they did, not only are they supposed to make the playoffs, but they are a dark horse Stanley Cup contender. And I just feel like what they have on paper from up front on their forward group to their defense core to their goaltender, who's top 3 in the NHL, and Connor Hellebuck. They're expected to make a lot of noise in that Central Division, I believe. Now, for the most part, they do have some relatively young pieces, so I do feel like they're going to be in the mix for trying to compete for a Stanley Cup for the next 5 years, I'll estimate. But still, the pressure is starting to get up there. They have the roster right now to become a Stanley Cup contender, especially in this salary cap era where guys just come and go. You never know if the team's going to look better or worse in these next year or two. So you know what? This is the time for Winnipeg to take that next step. Prove to everyone that they're no joke and they're not just some, okay team in a weak North Division. They can actually do something in the playoffs and maybe go all the way to a Western Conference Finals, maybe a Stanley Cup Finals, maybe even win the whole thing. So yeah, look out for the Jets, but I feel like there is some significant pressure on this team. Coming in at the number 1 spot, to me, this was very obvious. The team that I feel has the most pressure to win the Stanley Cup this season, coming out of the Central Division, I believe it's Colorado Avalanche. Now, this team has a lot of very good pieces, a lot of depth, but a lot of their core guys are still relatively young. But they have established themselves over these last 3 years as a true Stanley Cup contender in this league. But, under the Nathan MacKinnon era, have yet to get by the second round. So the pressure is starting to climb, especially the team that's so dominant on paper, especially in the regular season. It's time for them to finally break through and win a Stanley Cup. It's basically cup or bust for this Avalanche team. Mikko Rantanen, 24 years old. Gabriel Landeskog, 28. Nathan MacKinnon, 26. Andre Burakovsky's 26. You got Nazem Kadri, who's 31. Cale Makar, only 22, but already one of, if not the best defenseman in the league. And then you got Sam Girard, who's only 23, but him too, an amazing defenseman himself. And Bowen Byram, who's only 20 years old, and he's going to be a very good defenseman as well. A lot of very young pieces, but already established NHL players. Not only established NHL players, but established stars in the league. Combine that with Darcy Kemper, who's a very solid goaltender, but 31 years old. The time is now for this Avalanche team. They just have all the pieces to do it, and they got to get going, or else things will not look good. It will be considered a huge disappointment if they don't win a Stanley Cup. They do have a bit of a younger roster compared to some other teams like the Blues, for example. However, everyone seems to be penciling this team in as one of the favorites, if not the favorite, to win the Stanley Cup. So naturally, they are the team to have the most pressure in this Central Division. I'd argue they probably have the most pressure in the entire league, just because I feel like they're the odds-on favorite to win the Stanley Cup given the talent they have. So yeah, no-brainer here. They're number 1 on this list. Cup or bust in Colorado. That's going to do it for this video on my rankings of which teams I feel have the most pressure to win the Stanley Cup in the Central Division. Ranked from number 1 being who has the most pressure to number 8, the least pressure. Let me know your thoughts on this list where I have these teams ranked. Do you agree with these rankings? Or if not, what would you change? Stay tuned for some more hockey content. Any topics you'd like me to discuss in hockey or in the NHL world, please let me know. I'm open to all those ideas. So please give a shout out. Let me know what you guys want me to talk about. Anyway, that's it for me. Thanks again for watching. Click like if you like this video. Consider subscribing to the channel. And I will talk to you in the next one. I'll see you guys later.